I always prided myself on my ability to keep things under control. My life was the perfect balancing act: a thriving career, a picturesque home in the suburbs, and a loving family. Or so I thought. When I hired Madison, the young, bright-eyed nanny with glowing references, I believed I was making a smart decision. My demanding job as a marketing executive often kept me late at the office, and with my husband Eric also working full-time, we needed help with our 3-year-old daughter, Lily. Madison seemed perfect: responsible, nurturing, and genuinely fond of children. She instantly bonded with Lily, and her cheerful demeanor brought a new sense of warmth to our household. Things started innocently enough. Madison would arrive early in the morning, sometimes before I even left for work. She always greeted me with a warm smile and an update on her plans for the day with Lily. Eric, being more laid back than me, quickly got along with her too. At first, I found their easy camaraderie comforting. It felt like we were building a small team dedicated to keeping our family running smoothly. But as the weeks turned into months, I began noticing little things that didn't sit right. Madison's laughter at Eric's jokes lingered a little too long. Eric, who had always been indifferent about his wardrobe, started dressing sharper on days he worked from home. Then there were the lingering glances between them that I couldn't quite place. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Madison was just a nanny and Eric was my husband. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, wasn't it? My suspicions gnawed at me, but I buried them under the mountain of responsibilities I carried. Then one day, I came home earlier than usual. It was a rare quiet afternoon at work, and I decided to surprise Lily and Madison with an impromptu trip to the park. I didn't announce my early return, savoring the idea of catching them off guard with my surprise. The house was eerily quiet when I entered. I called out for Madison, expecting to hear her voice chime back from the living room or kitchen. Instead, I heard muffled voices coming from upstairs. Confused, I followed the sound to the master bedroom. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open slightly. What I saw froze me in place. Eric and Madison sitting too close on the bed, their heads bowed in intense conversation. Madison's hand rested on Eric's knee, and though they sprang apart the moment they noticed me, the damage was done. The room crackled with an awkward tension that made my stomach churn. Eric stammered something about discussing Madison's upcoming plans to leave for college, but the look on Madison's face said otherwise. Her cheeks were flushed, and she avoided my eyes as if they might burn her. I didn't press them then, though the unease in my chest swelled to a suffocating weight. That night, as Eric slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. My resolve to find out the truth hardened. The next morning, I went through Madison's phone while she was in the shower, a move I'm not proud of, but felt justified in the moment. I didn't find anything incriminating, but the absence of evidence didn't calm my suspicions. Something was off, and I was determined to uncover it. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Madison had been unusually quiet during her shifts, and Eric seemed more withdrawn around me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room scrolling through emails, an unfamiliar number popped up on my screen. It was a message meant for Madison, sent mistakenly to my phone. "I can't keep this secret much longer. We need to talk." My breath hitched as I stared at the message. I responded immediately, pretending to be Madison. "What secret? Tell me now." The reply came faster than I expected. "I think she's starting to suspect. We need to tell her before she finds out herself." That's when the walls of my perfect life started to crumble. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed proof before I acted. Over the next week, I balanced my daily life with an ever-mounting dread as the investigator's findings trickled in. Photos of Eric and Madison meeting at a coffee shop, a late-night drive to a motel. Each piece of evidence was a hammer blow to my chest. Then came the ultimate revelation. The investigator handed me a series of text messages between Eric and Madison. It wasn't just an affair. Madison was pregnant. And Eric, my husband, the man I trusted with my heart and my family, was the father. The weight of betrayal threatened to crush me. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, clutching the evidence in my trembling hands. The image of Lily's innocent face kept flashing in my mind, her tiny hands reaching for me with unconditional trust. How could I protect her from the storm about to tear through our lives? I had to act, but I needed a plan. And most of all, I needed to confront Eric with the truth, on my terms, not his. The day I confronted Eric was one of the most surreal days of my life. I had spent the entire morning rehearsing what I would say, running through every possible scenario in my head. Would he deny it? Would he beg for forgiveness? Or, worst of all, would he confirm everything and show no remorse? By the time Eric returned home from work that evening, I felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. I waited until Lily was asleep before bringing it up. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. I slid the photos and printed text messages across the table without a word. Eric's face went pale as he sifted through the evidence. His hands trembled slightly, and for a moment, I saw the man I had married, vulnerable and human. But then, his expression hardened. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice shaking. I stared at him in disbelief. "Not what I think. Eric, she's pregnant. Do you think I'm blind?" He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he slumped in his chair, defeated. I didn't mean for this to happen. The anger I had been holding back burst forth. "You didn't mean for this to happen? You mean you accidentally carried on an affair with our nanny? You accidentally got her pregnant." My voice rose with each word, and Eric flinched as if each syllable were a physical blow. "It wasn't like that," he said weakly. It just happened. Madison was going through a rough time, and I was trying to be there for her. One thing led to another. I cut him off, unable to bear another excuse. "Do you even realize what you've done? To me? To Lily? You've shattered everything." My voice cracked, and I hated myself for showing weakness in front of him. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Eric leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I laughed bitterly. "Make this right? How, Eric? Are you planning to unimpregnate her?" Erase the betrayal from my memories. The conversation spiraled from there. Eric begged for a second chance, insisting that his affair with Madison was a mistake and that he still loved me. But how could I believe him? How could I trust a man who had not only cheated but had done so with the person we entrusted to care for our child? In the days that followed, my emotions swung wildly between fury and despair. I avoided Madison as much as possible, but I knew I couldn't ignore her forever. She was still coming to the house, though the tension was palpable. I couldn't bring myself to fire her. Not yet. I wanted answers, and I wanted them from her. When the confrontation finally came, it was as explosive as I had feared. I cornered Madison in the kitchen one morning after Eric had left for work and Lily was occupied with her toys in the living room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and firm. Madison froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. I know. I've been meaning to." "Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "I know everything. Eric told me." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. I laughed bitterly. "Funny, that's exactly what Eric said." "Is that your go-to line?" Madison flinched but didn't respond. The silence stretched between us until I couldn't stand it any longer. "Why, Madison? Why would you do this? You knew he was married. You knew we had a family." "I didn't plan it," she said, her voice cracking. "It just happened. He was there for me when I was struggling. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've managed to destroy everything anyway." Madison's tears spilled over, and she looked down at the floor. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her apology felt hollow, but I could see that she was genuinely struggling. Still, her pain didn't excuse what she had done. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You need to leave," I said finally. "Today. Pack your things and go. I don't want you near my family anymore." Madison nodded, her shoulders shaking as she cried. She left later that day, but her departure didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. The damage was done, and the fallout was only beginning. With Madison gone, I turned my focus to Eric. He was desperate to salvage our marriage, but I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and ours had been reduced to rubble. I agreed to attend counseling with him, not because I believed it would fix things, but because I needed clarity. I needed to understand how we had gotten here and whether there was any way forward. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself grappling with an overwhelming mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, and, surprisingly, a glimmer of hope. Could we rebuild? Could I ever forgive him? Or was this the end of our story? Only time would tell. The first counseling session was a minefield. Eric and I sat on opposite ends of the therapist's couch, the space between us filled with an air of tension so thick it felt suffocating. Dr. Hall, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, welcomed us with a warm smile. She introduced herself and gently guided us through the process, explaining that this was a safe space to express our feelings. Safe or not, I wasn't sure I could even articulate the storm raging inside me. Dr. Hall asked Eric to speak first. He hesitated, glancing at me as if seeking permission. "I know I've made the biggest mistake of my life," he began, his voice low. "I betrayed my wife, my family, and I'll never forgive myself for the pain I've caused. I want a chance to make things right." I stared at him, my heart aching with a mix of anger and sorrow. His words sounded sincere, but sincerity felt hollow after what he'd done. Dr. Hall turned to me, her gaze gentle but probing. "How do you feel hearing Eric say that?" I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "I feel like I don't know this man anymore. I trusted him with everything, and he tore it all apart." My voice cracked, and tears threatened to spill over. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him." Eric's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the guilt weighing on him. But guilt didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't erase the nights I'd spent crying or the humiliation I'd felt knowing Madison had been in our home, around our child, while carrying his baby. Over the next few sessions, Dr. Hall encouraged us to dig deeper into our feelings. I learned that Eric's affair hadn't started as a physical relationship. It had begun with emotional vulnerability, something I hadn't realized he'd been struggling with. He admitted to feeling neglected, overshadowed by my career and our hectic lives. "It doesn't excuse what I did," he said, "but I was lonely, and Madison, she listened." His words stung, but they also forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our marriage hadn't been as perfect as I'd thought. I'd been so focused on maintaining our outward image that I'd ignored the cracks forming beneath the surface. But even acknowledging my own shortcomings didn't make his actions any less painful. Meanwhile, life outside of therapy continued, and the fallout from Eric's affair was impossible to ignore. Lily, blissfully unaware of the turmoil, was my only source of comfort. I poured all my energy into being there for her, even as I felt my world crumbling around me. The hardest part was facing the whispers and judgment from those who had caught wind of the scandal. News travels fast in suburban neighborhoods, and it wasn't long before the gossip reached my ears. One afternoon, as I picked Lily up from preschool, another mother approached me. Her smile was overly sweet, her tone dripping with false concern. "I just wanted to say, you're so strong for dealing with everything. It must be so hard with, well, you know." I bit back a sharp retort, instead forcing a tight smile. "Thank you. I appreciate your support." Inside, I was seething. My private pain had become public fodder, and it felt like everyone was watching, waiting to see how I would handle the mess. But I refused to let their pity or judgment define me. If nothing else, I owed it to Lily to hold my head high. As the weeks went on, Eric's attempts to prove his commitment became increasingly desperate. He volunteered to handle all of Lily's school drop-offs and pickups, a task he'd rarely taken on before. He surprised me with thoughtful gestures, flowers, my favorite takeout, even a heartfelt letter apologizing for everything. But no matter what he did, it felt like he was trying to plaster over a shattered vase. The pieces might hold together for a while, but the cracks would always be there. The breaking point came one evening when I overheard Eric on the phone. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but his hushed tone caught my attention. My heart sank as I heard him say, "I've told you before, I'll take care of everything. Just give me more time." The conversation was brief, and when Eric hung up, he seemed startled to see me standing in the doorway.
"Who was that?"
I asked, my voice cold. He hesitated, and in that moment I knew. "It was Madison," he admitted. "She needed to talk about the baby." My chest tightened, anger flaring hot and fast. "You're still in contact with her?" "I'm not hiding anything," he said quickly. "I told you I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm responsible for that child, and I can't just walk away." His words, while rational, felt like another betrayal. "And what about our child?" I shot back. "What about your responsibility to this family's?" The argument escalated, each of us hurling words we couldn't take back. By the end of it, I felt more exhausted than angry. This wasn't just about Madison or the baby anymore. It was about the cracks in our foundation, the fractures that might never fully heal. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something painful but undeniable. Love might not be enough to save us. Forgiveness, trust, and commitment were the pillars of any marriage, and ours had been knocked down one by one. Could they ever be rebuilt? Or was it time to accept that some things were beyond repair? As the weeks stretched into months, the weight of everything that had happened became almost unbearable. Eric's repeated attempts to prove his commitment to our marriage felt like band-aids on a wound too deep to heal. I had tried to focus on therapy, on Lily, and even on my work, but the gnawing doubt and anger never left me. It became clear that no matter how hard we both tried, the shadow of Eric's betrayal was too large to ignore. One morning, while sipping coffee at the kitchen table, I received an unexpected email. It was from Madison. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. The subject line read, "I need to tell you everything." The email was long and detailed, outlining things I hadn't known and, frankly, things I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Madison admitted to the affair starting during a particularly difficult time in her life. She spoke of her loneliness and how Eric had been a source of comfort, but she also confessed something I hadn't expected, her doubts about Eric's sincerity. She claimed he had made promises to her that contradicted everything he had been telling me in therapy. Madison's words painted a picture of a man trying to play both sides, desperate to keep his family intact while also maintaining some sense of control over the situation with her. The email ended with an apology. Madison said she regretted everything and hoped I could eventually find peace, but she also made one thing clear: she was keeping the baby, and Eric had a responsibility to be part of its life. Reading her words felt like a fresh wound reopening. Eric had promised me transparency, but it was clear he hadn't been honest about the full extent of his involvement with Madison. My mind raced as I thought about the countless ways he had tried to reassure me, all while keeping parts of the truth hidden. That evening, I confronted him again. This time, I didn't hold back. I showed him the email and demanded answers. Eric's face fell as he read Madison's words, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had," he said weakly. "I thought I could handle everything without making things worse." "Handle everything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've done nothing but lie and manipulate everyone involved. Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused?" Eric's shoulders slumped, and he buried his face in his hands. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe you can't," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Maybe some things can't be fixed." That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind swirling with thoughts of what to do next. The idea of staying in the marriage felt suffocating, but the thought of tearing apart our family was just as painful. Lily adored her father, and despite everything, I couldn't deny that Eric had always been a devoted dad. Could I justify taking that away from her? The next few days were a blur of anger, sadness, and confusion. I sought advice from close friends, though I kept the details vague. One friend suggested I focus on what I truly wanted, not what others expected of me. Another advised me to consider Lily's happiness above all else. Both perspectives felt valid, but they didn't make the decision any easier. The tipping point came during another therapy session. Dr. Hall asked us to visualize what our lives would look like in 5 years if we stayed together versus if we separated. As I closed my eyes and imagined the future, a sob escaped my lips. In every scenario where Eric and I stayed together, the trust was still broken. The resentment lingered, and the tension never truly disappeared. But in the scenarios where I moved on, there was a sense of relief, even hope. It wasn't an easy vision to accept, but it felt honest. That night, I told Eric I needed space, real space, to figure out what I wanted. He protested at first, but eventually he agreed. He moved into a nearby apartment, and we began the painful process of separating our lives. We agreed to share custody of Lily, and despite my anger, I knew Eric would always be a good father to her. For that, at least, I was grateful. Living apart brought clarity I hadn't expected. Without the daily reminders of betrayal, I began to feel like myself again. I rediscovered hobbies I had neglected, spent more quality time with Lily, and even reached out to old friends I had lost touch with. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of happiness that wasn't overshadowed by pain. Eric, meanwhile, continued to reach out, hoping for reconciliation. He attended every therapy session even when I chose not to. He sent letters, emails, and even videos expressing his remorse and love for me. Part of me admired his persistence, but another part of me resented it. I needed time to heal, and his constant presence made that difficult. One day, as I watched Lily play in the park, I realized something profound. My happiness didn't have to depend on Eric or anyone else. I had the strength to rebuild my life on my terms, and while the path forward wasn't clear, it was mine to create. For the first time in a long time, I felt empowered. The decision to end our marriage wasn't easy, but it felt right. Eric and I sat down together and discussed how to move forward amicably, both for Lily's sake and our own. We agreed on a co-parenting plan and promised to prioritize Lily's well-being above all else. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned for our family, but it was a new beginning, and that was enough. The divorce papers sat on the table between us, a silent acknowledgement of what we both already knew. It had been nearly a year since the day my life had fallen apart, and now we were here, formally ending the chapter we once believed would last forever. Eric looked at me with a mix of regret and resignation, his hand hovering over the pen. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "It's what I need." As he signed his name, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. Despite everything, Eric had been a part of my life for so long that it was hard to imagine a future without him. But as the ink dried on the paper, I also felt a strange sense of relief. The weight I'd been carrying for months began to lift, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. The months leading up to this moment had been transformative. Therapy had become less about salvaging our marriage and more about finding myself again. I had spent so many years defining myself as Eric's wife and Lily's mother that I had forgotten who I was beyond those roles. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I started small, taking art classes and joining a local book club. I even began volunteering at a women's shelter, finding purpose and helping others navigate their own struggles. Eric's relationship with Madison had ended shortly after he moved out. She had decided to relocate to her hometown to be closer to her family, leaving Eric to navigate the complexities of co-parenting their child. It wasn't easy for him, and while part of me wanted to feel vindicated, I mostly felt pity. He was living with the consequences of his actions, just as I was. But where I found strength in starting anew, Eric seemed trapped in the shadow of his mistakes. One evening, as Lily and I shared a quiet dinner together, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Are you happy, Mommy?" Her question caught me off guard. I set down my fork, searching her face for the meaning behind her words. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged, poking at her peas with her spoon. "You smile more now. It's nice, Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached across the table to take her small hand in mine. Yes, Lily. I am happy. And do you know why? She shook her head, her curls bouncing. Because I have you, I said, my voice soft but firm. You make me the happiest I've ever been. Her smile lit up the room, and in that moment, I realized just how far I had come. The pain of Eric's betrayal would always be a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I was more than a woman scorned. I was a survivor, a mother, and a woman rediscovering her strength. On the day the divorce was finalized, I treated myself to something I hadn't done in years, a solo trip to the beach. As I walked along the shore, the salty breeze tangling my hair, I felt a profound sense of peace. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, a reminder that life, like the tides, was ever-changing. I paused to write something in the sand. New beginnings? The waves quickly washed it away, but the sentiment remained etched in my heart. In the months that followed, I learned to embrace my independence. I started dating again, cautiously but optimistically. I met people who valued honesty and shared my desire for a partnership built on trust. While I wasn't sure what the future held, I knew one thing for certain: I would never settle for less than I deserved. Eric remained a part of my life as a co-parent, and over time, our interactions became less strained. We found a rhythm that worked for Lily, prioritizing her happiness above all else. She thrived in our new arrangement, her laughter filling the spaces that once felt heavy with tension. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that filled my heart to the brim. I love you too, Lily. Always. As I closed her bedroom door, I took a deep breath and smiled. Life hadn't turned out the way I had planned, but it had given me something far more valuable: resilience, clarity, and the courage to start over. And for that, I was grateful.